he's next in line for best unit in the game. At least that's what I would have said if it weren't for the fact that he is absolute trash in actuality. Hey, Grimmy here, and today I'm going to be talking about what exactly makes Metal Cooler such a bad unit, despite actually looking pretty solid on paper, at least at first glance. I don't just want to talk about my missed analysis here, because I actually had a whole video scripted and recorded and everything. But I also want to go deeper into why the character's kit seems so deceptive, and what exactly are his flaws? What is he missing? What would he actually need in order to make him good? And I guess it's important that we talk about the misleading strengths. The thing about Metal Cooler, right, is, for starters, his stats are pretty solid. As a post-7th anniversary character, his damage, right, like his base damage stats are pretty solid. And obviously he's a defensive character, so it isn't exactly the highlight of his kit. Compare that to his defenses, which are obviously far better at its base. And obviously the first, really glaring flaw for the character would be the lack of damage guard, which I thought initially was actually quite fair for him to have such a low level of damage guard, such a low percentage, because he obviously is a character who has 3 lives, and I think it would kind of be unbalanced if he was hard to kill in the first life, equally as hard to kill in the second life, and impossible to kill in the third, with his obviously additional damage guard buffs as he fills up his unique gauge. And so this didn't really pop out to me as a kind of issue. And moving on to his cards, well, I think his special arts, for one, it's actually quite interesting. It's basically Super 17's green card, but for charging forward attacks, which to me I feel like was definitely going to be a way of shifting the meta, because nowadays we see so many characters with charging forward attacks, and obviously we have characters like Frieza with his death beam that are obviously not charging forward attacks while still being very effective, and that's something that Cooler obviously can't work around. It looked pretty solid to me at first glance, especially with the additional effects that, while you can't really immediately chain it the same way you could with a green card counter, this nullification does actually halt the enemy a little bit, to the point where if you wanted to attack after the fact, well, the odds of the opponent actually interrupting you would be far less. And we can take a look at Cooler's special move and ultimate arts as well, where I think in terms of design it's pretty basic, but one thing to really take note of is the fact that he has damage guard penetration on both. And that means that he's obviously cutting through what is effectively a defensive power creep that's going on with the modern units of today, especially with the 7th anniversary and every other character releasing after the fact. And jumping into the character's kit, well, what popped out to me the most would be the fact that Cooler does have some minor disrupt, which synergizes really well with his unique gauge, which actually charges very easily. Not just from the way his unique gauge is normally meant to charge up, but also using attacks, at least with 2 attacks as he enters the battlefield. And that makes the unique gauge a lot easier to charge up. Add on top of that the fact that, as you're getting hit with Metal Cooler and you're kind of reducing the enemy's ki, once you fill up your unique gauge, you're increasing the enemy's arts card cost, which to me I feel like is a bit of synergy, a bit of overlap in his kit that looked to be something that could really help his position as a defensive character. But what went wrong here? Clearly something is missing, and as you look at the character's performance in practice, well, what we see here just isn't enough. The missing pieces. The thing about Metal Cooler is that while yes, he does have pretty good stats, again, good offense for a post-7th anniversary character, and damage guard to the point where it's balanced, I feel like the reduction here is a little too massive. That's the first thing that I really need to point out, is the fact that 125% damage guard isn't really enough if you're going to get smoked by the current meta that's completely filled with yellow units, where you can go up against Super Saiyan Goku, Ultra Super Vegeta with his platinum equipment, or even Majin Vegeta, maybe even Gohan Beast, though, as unlikely as that is. And the only real weapon that you have against it would be 5 timer counts worth of damage received type neutral. That isn't enough. And that's another thing, right? If you look at Cooler for his 2 comebacks and his 3 lives, that does actually mean that you could actually tank 2 rising rushes in a match without actually losing a character, which is crazy. But if you take into account how squishy he is, well, it doesn't really matter. These 3 lives aren't as valuable as the 2 lives that a character like Revival Vegeta, for example, has. It's not the same as the 2 lives that even a character like Full Power Frieza has with his Endurance plus Buff Cancel combo. If you, as a character, a defensive character mind you, is so easy to kill and entirely dependent on your ability to revive yourself twice, well, you're still going to get smoked twice, and you're still going to revive twice, and that's going to happen very quickly. You're not going to be able to save that ability for the key moments of the fight, and that's a pretty glaring flaw. And then going deeper into Cooler's unique abilities, well, I think one thing worth taking note of here is the fact that when he enters the battlefield, he doesn't get ki. And he actually does get cover null when you attack, which I guess is a pretty 50-50 split, right? Because the game's devs promised to change their design philosophy to focus on making sure that, well, you know, if a defensive character is going to be defensive, they better be good at that, but also be not too good at being an offensive character, just so that it can really like lean into the role-playing game aspect of Dragon Ball Legends. But it's kind of tough for Metal Cooler to work with that philosophy as a defensive character if every other unit in the game who has fairly consistent cover null, at least has very consistent levels of ki, also have an additional defensive gimmick to go along with it. Case in point, Kaioken Goku. When the devs promised that they'll change their design philosophy only for them to go back on it in several character releases, and then have the best units in the game still be working against that design philosophy, well, that leaves all of the characters who are supposed to match that design philosophy in the dirt, makes them a lot weaker. For Cooler specifically, well, entering the battlefield without any ki is a huge detriment to the character's combo potential, because sometimes when we're talking about a character's combo potential, we look too deep into cover null, we fixate on it, and we kind of forget how important it is to get cards and ki, because that's the bare minimum that you can get, and it's supposed to go hand in hand with the additional cover null whenever you start your combo. If you look at his type neutrality as well, which is a pretty key element in deciding how good a character is offensively, he only gets it on his special move with a full unique gauge, and it's entirely cancelable, so it's not exactly a very consistent type neutrality. These are probably the biggest flaws that I think hold the character back, and prevent him from actually being good in practice. But what's the takeaway here? What is it from Metal Cooler exactly that's at least worth knowing and worth taking into account when we take a look at future releases on paper? Conclusion: invisible bad unit design. Metal Cooler, I feel like the way his abilities, his unique gauge, his unique abilities, his cards, the way these aspects of the character work together, well, there's at least some clear overlap to it. There's some real synergy to the character's strengths, but at the same time, if you take a look at the character's weaknesses and the way these flaws are kind of built into the character as a way of making him balanced, as a way of making him a more defensive-leaning character, his weaknesses synergize very well just the same. From his mediocre amount of damage guard early on in the fight, to his lackluster effects on his cards, and you know, these cards obviously not being as strong as they could be, and unique abilities that don't really support him all the way, being very half-assed in terms of their design, and a unique gauge that, while I guess works pretty well, can't really perform at its fullest with a lack of unique abilities that could support it, and no ki on entering the battlefield. These are just some things that kind of go under the radar when the game chooses to highlight the fact that a character like him does actually have 3 lives. Not to say that that doesn't have any value, but the way the character is designed, those lives don't really matter just as much. And because of that, I think Cooler had a lot of potential, especially being a new unit post 7th anniversary with a unique gimmick. And he had a real shot of shifting the meta and bringing back his team, that being LOE, back into the meta in a big way. The same way Full Power Frieza did on his release during the 7th anniversary. But unfortunately, the way the character is designed, that doesn't really happen. But what's your take on Metal Cooler? Let me know in the comment section down below if I missed any of the character's flaws, kind of forgot to mention them here, or if you actually think that Cooler does actually offer some value that I think I kind of failed to highlight as I'm going over the character's kit. If you want to know what a good meta character looks like, you know, unlike Cooler, I suppose, especially one who's really good on paper, you should check out the Kaioken Goku breakdown on your left. And if you want to know a character who I think also has a similar leaning to Metal Cooler, just in a more offensive way, you can check out the Kefla breakdown on your right. And yeah, I think that's gonna do it for this video. Bye, thanks for watching, never stay perfect, always get better. Peace.